Inequality and inclusion have topped the agenda at this year's Global Labour Market Conference in Riyadh this week. I sat down with Nobel Prize winning economist James Robinson to talk about his research into the root causes of global inequality and the pivotal roles of institutions. James, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, this is a new conference. It's fairly well attended for one so young, I suppose. How important do you think meetings like this are for the world economy?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I think this meeting is fascinating in the sense that what's been going on in this country in the last decade is a kind of transformation in the labour market, which is unique, I think, by world historical standards. Think about the changing role of women in this country and the massive increase in female labour force participation. That's something dramatic and really fascinating to study.
And a lot of your work has been around the issue of inequality and where that sits within the whole scheme of things. How high do you find that being on the agenda here, informally or formally?
Well, I think everyone is it is on the agenda. I think everyone is a bit obsessed with AI for all the obvious reasons. It's the kind of flavour of the year or the month or the something. And so I think there's a lot of discussion of inequality, labour market issues, but obviously AI feeds into that because many people are thinking about how AI will lead to transformation of work and the demand for labour and employment and how to make it complementary with a kind of an economy of shared, wealth and prosperity.
I've heard it mentioned that, or even complained here, that a lot of the world's economies are still in their own silos in terms of policy as well as in terms of how they operate. I mean, is there still a need for cooperation and partnership to be encouraged and increased?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of scope for learning. I think what's interesting about this country, and I think most of the countries in the Arabian Peninsula, is there's just been a huge sort of thirst for kind of learning and a demand for like trying to understand what did other people do, how did they do it, what lessons are they, could we do that here, is that going to work here? And so I think that's an important role of meetings like that. There's a lot of people from all over the world with different skills and expertise. And there's a lot of curiosity about what other people know. So I think that role is important.
Have you been impressed by that in the conversations you've had here?
Yeah, I think so.
What about the two other terms I've heard a lot of in the last couple of days, upskilling and inclusion, which play into that notion of equality, I suppose. But they're both being nominated, if you like, as being skills that we need to pay attention to or issues that we need to pay attention to going forward. Would you agree with that? Yes,
I think inclusion is absolutely fundamental. If people ask me, I work a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, and if you ask me, like what's the biggest problem, for Nigeria, I'd say wasted talent. It's not even a sentence, it's two words, wasted talent. There's just, those people are not included. People are not included. They don't have opportunities, they don't have a bank account, they don't have proper education, they don't have access to services, their lives are insecure, they're not included in the kind of opportunities that someone like me took for granted when I was growing up in England. And so inclusion is absolutely critical. And these are the countries, of course, where huge proportions of the population are in the first quarter of their life or in the first quarter of a century. Absolutely, yes. That's something that is still an elephant in the room, or is that something that people are appreciative of? The whole demography? I don't know. I mean, it has all sorts of consequences. I think, in the West, we're living in countries with aging populations, and I suppose one solution to that is to allow migrants to come, but that's politically infeasible, certainly at the moment. But I think there's all sorts of potential in those countries with those very young societies. It's just that the impression one gets, particularly following so soon after the meetings in Davos, is that where the advanced economies are all readdressing the culture of opportunity and the culture of learning and the culture of education, talking themselves about huge winds of change being brought through by digitization and AI and all the rest of it. And then in the global south, you've got economies that are just starting on some of those journeys, but having to deal with those same issues. Yeah, partially, but I think, what's the proportion of people in Nigeria or Sierra Leone who have access to a computer? I think you find it's less than 5%. There's enormous challenges with electricity, basic infrastructure. I teach at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka in the summers, and there's no internet, there's no power, there's no running water, there's just, so what does that tell you? It means that, AI is a force probably for widening inequality at the world level, because yes, it's going to make developing countries more productive, maybe create more inequality within developing countries, because some people are going to be a lot less able to take advantage of that or enjoy the fruits of that. But of course, between countries, it's going to create greater inequality, because poor countries don't have the basic infrastructure to take advantage of AI.
And where do you think we'll find solutions to those problems?
Well, I think those solutions are fundamentally institutional and political. They're not technical, they're not technological. There's no simple technical fix for, the political problems in developing countries.
But modernization means so many different things, doesn't it, depending where you live and what you're faced with. And there's a hope, I would suppose, at a conference like this, where there'd be a harmonizing of the modernization idea.
Well, modernization how? I think one interesting thing is there's different roads to modernization. I think, the road that the UAE, for example, took, or the road that the Saudi Arabia is trying to take, is very different from the road that Western societies took. Like we didn't develop, in the British case, we think of modernization as involving getting rid of the absolutist monarchy, for example.
Are you optimistic about the landscape that's being discussed here, and the landscape generally the planet faces in terms of the world of work?
I'm not sure I'm well enough informed to be either optimistic or pessimistic, actually. I think there's so much uncertainty at the moment about which way this can go, but I think that's exciting in the sense that which way it can go depends on the decisions we make. I think, the crucial thing, as I was saying in my speech yesterday, is to try to start making those decisions consciously and think about the options.
Can you give us a taste of what you were putting forward in your speech yesterday?
Well, I wasn't putting forward an agenda. I was just pointing out that if you look at the last 40 years, we didn't think about that. Reagan, Thatcher revolution said, just trust the market, everything will be fine. And it wasn't fine, actually. In the United States, if you didn't have a college education, you're worse off now than you were when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. Those people's jobs disappeared as a consequence of automation, as a consequence of globalization, and nothing was done to help them. And that's creating enormous social and political problems in the United States at the moment.
Do you think that'll point towards a revolution in how we educate our young people in the future?
Well, I think that's also coming. AI is a tool. We're struggling with how to engage with that at the University of Chicago. How do we introduce it in our classes? How do we teach students to use it in a productive way, not just like making up homework questions, but like how can they use it to make themselves more productive and make themselves more desirable on the labor market? I think it's coming in everywhere in terms of education.
James, final thought then, what's your takeaway from this year's GLMC?
Well, I think it's an exciting moment. I love the kind of ambition and the confidence to try to talk about these global issues, from the global south, we're north of the equator, but I guess you'd say this is the global south. I think far too much of the development narrative or the world policy narrative is, rich countries telling poor countries what to do. So I think we need a lot more of poor countries setting the agenda and talking about their own challenges and their own contexts and trying to sort of, level that playing field a bit.
Well, that would suggest that regions like the Middle East could become champions of that development.
Yeah, because they have much more capacity to do that than, say, African countries do or many other parts of the world.
James, pleasure. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
My pleasure.
Professor James Robinson there. Join me for more in this series, Shaping the Future of the Labour Market, where we'll be speaking to other thought leaders and experts at the GLMC.